Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new topic with Rights and Responsibilities Awareness Initiative. Today, we are super lucky to have Ernest Johansson, an expert with mental health issues, to talk to us about something that actually getting into our life in a noticeable way, which is the digital addiction or internet addiction. Thank you so much, Ernest, for being here with us today to talk about this important topic.
I'm very glad to be here and I feel very passionate about these issues. And I think that it's helpful that we have open and educated discussions about the issues that we face in terms of mental health. And digital addiction is um, an addictive disorder or condition that is on the rise, and it's all the more prevalent, and understanding it is very important moving forward. So I'm very happy to speak on this. So shall I get into it?
Please.
Okay. So um, digital addiction is a behavioral addiction. And addiction in terms of something to treat or a disorder has, I think, the best working definition is a relationship with a mind-altering substance or behavior in which the individual may not want the consequences, may not want the ramifications, but ultimately is not in control of disengaging from the substance or behavior. So, definition of addiction is predicated on a lack of control. And so with that in mind, I think a little bit of background on addiction in and of itself is probably helpful. There are three components of addiction. There is the social, what behaviors, be it engaging with others or isolating, what behavioral kind of traditions or rituals are associated with the addiction is one component. Another component is the physiological, which with behavioral addictions is not a factor. That would be the chemical dependence or the one's body's homeostasis requiring the addictive substance. That's not a factor in behavioral addictions. And then there is the psychological. In other words, what does the addiction do with your thought process and then chemically in the brain in order to maintain um, its status in your life? Now, digital addiction in and of itself, like any addiction, anything that manipulates dopamine levels is can be addictive. So shopping can be addictive because there's a little spike of dopamine when you acquire something. Um, Substances can be addictive, but ultimately that is related to how they impact your brain. And there's a little spike of dopamine. And dopamine is what your brain uses to reward itself. And like with any sort of mental health pathology or mental health compulsion or disorder, um, addiction is, in a sense, an extension of a normal pattern behavior. Dopamine is how our brain rewards itself for accomplishing something. So, if we complete a very challenging physical task, we're going to be flooded with endorphins and dopamine. If we spend time with a loved one, be it romantically or friendship or familial, your brain will have a spike in dopamine. If you eat a satisfying meal, or if you complete a academic task or a work task or what have you, your brain has a dopamine spike. And that's natural. That's what it's supposed to do. And digital addiction is the same, has the same components. When you engage with social media and there's a little piece of, a TikTok, let's say, that piques your interest, that causes a spike in dopamine. So this is a natural process. And essentially this natural process in your brain gets hijacked into a relationship with something that ultimately you fall out of control of. Now, there are different types of online addiction or digital addiction rather. And some of them have comorbidities, like gambling online can be related to the behavioral addiction of gambling. Sex addiction or cybersexual addiction can be related to sexual addictive disorders outside of digitally. Um, there are others that fit that as well. Cyber social relationships, i.e., being addicted to chat rooms or dating sites or what have you, have some overlap with some behavioral addictions outside of digitally. And then there are others that don't have a relationship outside of digitally. In particular, gaming, online gaming addiction, and also, in a sense, research it. There's actually codified addictions around being addicted to researching information, be it academically or more informally or what have you. Again, centered around manipulations of that dopamine spike. Um, and one thing that's increasingly common, especially with younger people, but certainly can impact middle-aged people such as ourselves as well, is this kind of creation of a dual identity with an online persona or a digital persona and an offline persona. And in some cases, people will invest a great deal of their offline lives to building up this online or digital sense of self that is maybe held in esteem in a certain gaming world or certain online social environment to the detriment of the rest of their lives. And in particular, there was a famous case in the United States where a young woman was employed by a law firm, and her day-to-day life would be seemed quite humble, but she embezzled $400,000 from her law firm for the sake of bolstering her online status. So there are real world consequences. Now, digital addiction itself um, first became observed in the 90s, in particular around, if some of us are old enough to remember, AOL chat rooms in North America, in which people would be charged $2 or $3 a minute, or $2 or $3 an hour, sorry, to engage with these chat rooms and talking to other people. And one of the things that would happen would be that they would disengage from their own social lives, and in some instances there are actually divorces based upon the partner's engagement with um, with potential online partners. So yeah, and again, it's all about manipulating dopamine spikes. There's a condition that is associated with risk-seeking behavior associated with dopamine spikes, and that's rewards deficiency syndrome. And basically, it's a irregular and addictive relationship with seeking those thrills or dopamine spikes. And like with any addictive behavior, people will need more and more to get kind of the craving satisfied, and that leads to higher risk and more extreme behaviors. And that is certainly a part of online addiction. As well, there are other cases in which people will spend 80 to 100 hours a week engaging digitally and neglect their lives outside of that, failing work, school, social relationships, etc. Um, Point being that some of the manifests are quite bad, and it's not a laughing matter. It's not something to be minimized. Now, and again, with digital addiction, like any other addiction, there are psychological withdrawal features. And it looks a lot like actually depressive features. People will lose interest in things. There's often anger at limits. There are cases where adolescents have physically assaulted their parents or caregivers when the internet was shut off, for instance, um, and also suicidal feelings, etc. Now, there is also a high rate of comorbidity with other mental health disorders, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, OCD, which used to be classified as an anxiety disorder and kind of now has its own classification, but there's a lot of overlap with anxiety, um, ADHD, substance use and misuse, anything that, well, and also other personality disorders, impulse control disorders, cluster B personality disorders, and sleep disorders, all can be a comorbidity with online addiction or digital addiction. And then something that digital addiction has in common with a lot of behavioral addictions, but not all, is there's an inherent difficulty in treatment. In other words, there are some with substance addiction, abstinence from the substance is a treatment option. That's not to say it's the only option. Harm reduction has a place. Harm reduction in terms of tapering behavior or tapering modalities of treatment. In other words, if someone came to me as a therapist and they were addicted to methamphetamines, it'd be a very viable treatment option to have them switch to using cannabis and then addressing the addictive behavior, because the amount of chaos in their lives would slow down, the amount of harm would be diminished to an extent. And yes, you're trading one addictive behavior for another, but you're reducing the harm. It's harm reduction. And that has value. But in a lot of ways, aiming for abstinence or abstinence in and of itself is a lot easier for someone who's struggling with addiction to engage with. In other words, an alcoholic who has an out of control relationship with alcohol, it's very easy to think binarily, I'm just not going to drink. Whereas controlling drinking is inherently challenging. And by definition, addicts are not likely to be able to learn how to do that. Although I have seen cases where that's happened in terms of my personal work or my professional work, anecdotally, it's very hard. And you can treat gambling addiction or cybersexual addiction with abstinence models as well. However, there are some addictions that you cannot treat that way. Shopping addiction, and shopping addiction or addictions around disordered eating, you have to eat. And it's very hard to function in this world unless you have like a personal shopper to never buy something. And I would argue that the treatment for a digital addiction is very challenging in the sense that to function in today's world, it's very hard not to engage digitally. So treatment involves putting boundaries on the behavior, which inherently, by the definition of addiction, having a out of control relationship with the behavior defines it. So you're setting boundaries on something in which you can't control. Now, this requires professional help, frankly. Is it possible for people to go cold turkey? In a sense, yes. But again, I don't know of very many instances in which someone can function in the modern world without some degree of digital engagement. We're on a digital platform, which, I mean, I'm sure there's no addiction in truly Luddite communities in which there's, very little engagement with technology. But I would argue that's a cart before the horse scenario. And frankly, I don't think there's any society or any point in human history where people haven't engaged with things that can be potentially addictive. I would argue that most of us have caffeine in our lives, which is chemically addictive. Now, the consequences of it are such that, withdrawal symptoms are a headache and crankiness. Negatives associated with use are the inability to wake up or be fully awake and functional without it, which dissipates actually after 9 days. Metabolites for caffeine leave your body in 9 days. And, you're not going to OD on it. The amount of caffeine that's potentially fatal is way beyond any sort of realistic consumption of it. So it's of little consequence, but it is, by definition, addictive. Now, if we were to function in a purely Luddite society, i.e., people who are fully against addiction, or I'm sorry, fully against technology, there wouldn't be digital addiction. There'd be other addictions because there are many things that can spike dopamine levels. So treatment is inherently challenged because digital engagement is required, essentially, in the modern world. And in short, to treat any addiction, you have to look at the cycles of change. In addiction models, the cycles are pre-contemplative. The individual doesn't think there's a problem with, in this case, their behavior. They will justify their behavior, minimize any known consequence, deny any known consequence, or if there is a consequence, potentially blame others. And if someone is in an addictive relationship with a behavior, they will do whatever they can to protect justifying or minimizing or rationalizing the behavior or blaming others for the consequence. And that would be the pre-contemplative phase. They aren't consciously aware and don't consciously express that there is a problem at all. They will essentially, you spent 30 hours last week playing World of Warcraft. I don't even know if people play that game anymore. I've never played it. I just know the name. And they'll be like, yeah, and so you missed work for 3 days. Well, I had sick days. It's okay. What if you get really sick and have to use those? Yeah, I'll figure it out. For instance, I mean, that's a hypothetical conversation. And then there's contemplative. And contemplative means that the individual will be seeking change. Like, there's a problem here, but not know what to do. And they might be like, I missed 2 days of work last week and I spent 30 plus hours gaming. And I know this isn't sustainable. I don't know what to do though. And then there's the early action phase, which is they start to take actions. It might be reaching out to a friend, a family member, a mental health professional, or what have you. And they are like, okay, I need to start doing something. And then there's the maintenance phase, which is they start getting in a pattern of controlling their behavior and having a better relationship with, in this case, digital engagement, and they live in a more sustainable way. Now, people oscillate back and forth between contemplation and non-contemplation and contemplation and early action phase quite a bit, especially in early recovery. And then people can have many years of recovered relationships with a behavior or sobriety, if you will, although that's usually used for substances, and then revert back based upon traumas, based upon triggers, based upon circumstances, or what have you. So that's always a potentiality with someone with addictive relationships or tendencies. Um, and then also comorbidity, I can't say that word today. Comorbidity is very common with the digital addiction. So oftentimes, a controlled, safe relationship with digital engagement requires treatment of that comorbidity, be it ADHD or clinical anxiety or what have you, anything where it ties in well with ADHD and anxiety because triggering of those reward centers is something that in the short term assuages things that are symptomatic of those conditions. And ADHD isn't a disorder, it's just a different way of brain function, mind you, neurodiverse brain function. So I don't want to infer that's a disorder, but rather people with ADHD are inherently more at risk for digital addiction. Anyhow, so those are kind of two things to look at for treatment is the comorbidity and then the modalities of being able to engage in a safe way with digital engagements, digital interfaces. Now, what does that look like? I mean, frankly, a lot of it is setting boundaries on your engagement, disengaging from social media to start. For instance, if one has as they say, doom scrolling tendencies where you're kind of awashed at all these negative images online, or if you are in a position where your online persona is becoming too much of a focus in your offline life. I will say that I gave up social media about 4 months ago, and I wouldn't say I had an addictive relationship or anything of the sort, but I did notice improvements in my life. I definitely saw times in my personal life where I was thinking I'd be doing something with one of my sons and or with my daughter, and I'd be like, oh yeah, this would go great on Instagram. I should, arrange this so I get a good Instagram picture and subsequent story associated with it. And since I've given up social media, there has been an improvement in those interactions because it's like, wait, why am I even thinking that way? Well, like, what's the point? The relationship that matters is in this case, the relationship with my child and I. It's not about whatever clicks and reactions I get online. And you'll find that again, I don't think I pathologically have an addiction to digital engagement, but you'll find that like it does impact the way you think about your interactions if you're very driven to post on social media, for instance. I digress. So boundaries with the digital engagement, be it time limits, be it things you engage with digitally, i.e., no Instagram, no Facebook, for instance, be it limits on who you engage with online and things like that. Some red flags, spending money that you don't have for enhancement of online personas is a major red flag. A volume of time such that you're not meeting your basic needs, be it sleep, food, washing your clothes, taking care of your own body. And there are instances of people neglecting to bathe or even use the washroom properly when in particular with gaming addiction, but other digital addictions. And those are red flags. Like I really need to go to sleep, but then I catch myself playing Angry Birds until 2 a.m. several nights in a row, and then your life is impacted. That's kind of a red flag. Now, I don't mean to be alarmist. I think that most people who engage digitally, don't do so in an addictive way. However, social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, their design, the way they craft themselves is such that they want you to get that little dopamine spike. So you come back, so you view their ads, so you buy their products. And a skeptic might say that capitalist society's purchase is to create addictions and then sell you the cure. And I think you could make this argument here very clearly. So alarmist news stories, some of which are accurate, mind you, but a disproportionate amount of alarmist news stories to kind of get that almost like your endocrine system reacting and that little spike of dopamine or adrenaline even to buy into your engagement a little bit, to make you buy in. Those are ways that a lot of social media engages that can be very problematic. And I do recommend setting strong boundaries on your social media, being time of day, being what media you engage with, or days of the week, or what have you. But something that works for you, mind you. And I think that's a red flag to look out for. So neglecting your basic needs, your what we'd say in mental health industries is ADLs, and then activities of daily living, and then also losing time to digital engagement. So those are general red flags. And beyond that, I mean, that's kind of what I have to say off the top of my head here about digital addiction. So, Hetham, are there any questions or anything?
Thank you so much, Ernest, for this fruitful information. I was actually, and I do believe there's so many people who thought that addiction is only related or limited to chemical organic stuff. So I need
Hmm.
to eat, drink, smell something, so I would be addicted. So, but I can see here that no, addiction could be stemmed from habits, which is the point you mentioned. Whatever raises that dopamine level in your brain
Hmm.
makes you addicted to it. So, if I may summarize what you've just said, that well, once you've noticed one of those red flags, you need to start, acting about it.
Yeah, I would argue just be proactive about it. And it's like dopamine spikes in your brain are a natural part of human existence. It's our reward center. We should seek fulfilling meals, for instance, and you get a dopamine hit when you prepare and eat a fulfilling meal. You should seek the company of loved ones or friends, and you get a dopamine hit or spike when that happens. Those are things that are good for us. And essentially, behavioral addictions in particular hijack that system, so to speak.
Mhm. So, and in general, just keep an eye on how much time we've spent and if there is any consequences for this addiction, spending a lot of time on whatsoever, regardless. But this is super helpful and fruitful. So, and let's hope that this could be uh, enlightening for
I
somebody
hope
who is
so.
in need.
I certainly hope so. And maybe one piece I could add to that too is purpose. If your job involves being online for 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, what have you, that's not addictive behavior. You're on there for a purpose. If you're purchasing groceries online, that's not addictive behavior. You're meeting your basic needs. And I, like many people, my mom lives, 5,000 kilometers away from me. I talk to her online. That is good. That is a good purpose of digital engagement. But keeping in mind purpose is highly important as well. So
Indeed.
time, purpose, consequences of being online, those are things to keep an eye on.
Thank you so much. And at the end of this session, I would like to thank you, Ernest Johansson, for this time, knowledge that you have shared with us. Thank you so much for your time and effort.
You're very welcome, and I'm very passionate about these issues, and I'm very happy to discuss whatever mental health issue is present.
Yeah, and this would be the first session of an upcoming series as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we are looking forward to see you at another session with Rights and Responsibilities Awareness Initiative.